you guys, I'm here with Ben from UnchartedX. He's a YouTube researcher, or I don't know, would you call yourself a YouTube researcher? Like, how do you label what you are?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a YouTuber, content creator, independent researcher might be the term. Yeah, I don't know. I've been asked that question recently as well on another podcast. I was in New York at a podcast, and yeah, I got introduced as a roadie from Metallica on that one, but yeah, no, I guess independent researcher. Yeah, you definitely a YouTuber. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, he does amazing stuff on, well, I mean, what I think that you are the premier person of is the precision and tool, like advanced tooling and like highlighting like in detail exactly where to find it and what it's about. And I think that that's, I don't know how you would define that as your claim to fame, but I like that as your claim to fame.
Thank
So
you. Yeah, I
yeah.
don't know. It's like I guess I have kind of made that thing my ballywick, if you like, or yeah, the whole ancient tech, the evidence for it. I guess that is, yeah, that's an interest of mine, and I guess that's where most of the content goes. Although I do touch on other areas of it, but yeah, I mean, all my big deep dives are all pretty much, diving into the details of the tool marks and the tools that we used, how that lines up with kind of the standard model of history and Egyptology, and well, not just Egyptology, but archaeology in general. South America, other places like that are of interest as well. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's the space that I found myself in, the niche.
Yeah. I mean, your most recent thing you're doing is this vase or
Yeah.
vase, as you say. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that is a pre-dynastic, like private collection. Uh, that so okay, let me get this straight. It was scanned 4 years ago, but
Around there.
then you're just like how like are they just bringing it to your light now, or is it more like they've just this is when
Well,
they've come through with all the data?
yeah, so the background to this, and if people haven't seen it, I have a couple of videos on it. I think it's truly groundbreaking work. It's something personally been very validating for me because it's exactly the kind of thing that I've been calling for years now, in terms of looking at these artifacts. We can look at them with the eye. You can do some basic measurements if you have access. Nothing with real depth of precision and analysis, and that's what's finally taken place here. It's a pre-dynastic granite vase of there's tens of thousands of these such artifacts that exist in museums. There's also a lot of them in private collections. Typically, one of the issues is with the ones in museums is that curators and Egyptologists in general have no real interest in doing this sort of analysis, this type of investigation into the engineering and the manufacturing that's gone into them. So when private collectors who have these artifacts, they one of these the owner of this vase in particular reached out to actually Alex Dunn, he had met Chris Dunn and his son Alex. Chris, of course, has written Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt, the Giza Power Plant. He's working on another book now. He's a friend of mine, and they reached out and said, "Look, he's got a couple of these vases. Do you want to sort of get them analyzed?" And they sort of followed through and eventually, because these guys, Alex Dunn and his colleague Nick Sierra, who are in the video, they're professional metrologists, right? They do this for a living. They work in the aerospace industry. They make precision parts, so they have access to this type of machinery. They really understand the nature of precision, why it's important. So they got this vase, and it was they arranged for it to be scanned. I think at a place up in was it Connecticut or somewhere like that, as a Capture 3D place. They used what's called a structured light scanner, which measures, it maps out the surface of objects, and it creates a point cloud of systems, but it's down to 20 microns and thousandths of an inch, so it's extremely
Like a human hair or
precise.
something, right?
Yeah, so the measurements, you see some of the tolerances and precision that you see in the report, you're talking single thousandths of an inch, and a human hair, for reference, is somewhere between 2 and 3 thousandths of an inch thick. So it's like half the width or less than a third the width of a human hair. So it's crazy, very, very accurate representations of it. And yeah, so this was the actual scan took place a few years ago, but then you're just left with this scan, right? This point cloud data, this model of this thing. You then have to analyze that and really look at do all of the work that's required in a CMM machine or CAD program or some other program that can take those models and do the analysis to then produce a report and understand the nature of the precision. So that's, this was a side job for these guys for a little while, but that's what that's what they did. And then the results, if you've seen the videos, absolutely astonishing. Like the depth of precision. And in fact, we're only scratching the surface on this thing.
I mean, it's basically
Um,
kind of like there's no way this could have been done by hand, essentially.
that's the conclusion. Yeah, I mean, there's according to, and you could, I mean, you go and look at the comments in a lot of those videos. There's literally dozens of machinists and people that work with these types of tools, and they understand the nature of precision. That they're the fact that it's carved with such a high degree of precision, like the geometric relativity of different parts of the vase to the center line, and the top of the vase is within these these tiny little tolerances, and the fact it's carved from rose granite, which is extremely hard and very challenging material. It's not a consistent hardness. You go from softer to harder bits in the stone with the quartz and the micron hornlet. So there's lots of challenges there. But the consensus and all of the experts and everybody that's looked at this that understands it is like, yeah, there's no way you can do this by hand. Now,
I mean, like I do cabbing. Like I have a big diamond like a cabbing machine and a diamond drill saw thing, and even just like things like sodalite, like would have like the has stuff in it that's like that the white part of sodalite will be like a 4.5 all the way to like a 6. And when you're like on a diamond, like like when I'm trying to like round out the stone, I mean, it's super hard to get it to be consistent when you have the different kinds of stones within the same thing. So even with our own diamond drill bit stuff, it's hard. So this is why it's really weird.
Yeah, it's the results of it are really astonishing. Now, the one of the things we did do, and we had always intended to do as part of this, was to release essentially a model, an STL file of the vase for people that want to try and do it. So the challenge is out there. We can say it's impossible, and somebody might claim that they think it is possible. So we've got the data now. The data's out there. It's publicly available for anybody who wants to try and make one. I know lots of people have been 3D printing it off the model. There's been some just absolutely amazing further analysis done, getting back to kind of the design intent of the vase, and a lot of the geometric analysis of the vase has been done by a number of people. There's been a couple of articles written about it. In fact, I'm going to talk to some of those people in a few days coming up here. That's what I meant by we're just scratching the surface of the precision and almost the geometry that's encoded this thing, and trying to work backwards to what the design of the vase may have been and how they designed it, which we're getting closer to.
Well, how expensive is it to scan? Like, is this going to be possible? Like, if
yeah, so that's a good question, and it's what we're trying to do. So these guys have connections to a lot of people and a lot of companies that have access to this sort of equipment. We would definitely try for relevant artifacts. So obviously more vases. We're very interested in scanning more vases. And I hope that some of this work may even open the doors to some of the museum curators who have access to, vases that aren't from the private space that have like impeccable provenance. Because one of the criticisms that I knew was going to come up was that like people could question its provenance. I mean, there's always going to be naysayers in this. It's a very controversial space in general, the whole ancient tech thing. Rather than dealing with the data and the nature of it, what most people, the tactics are to just sort of hand wave it away and say, well, we don't know anything about this vase. How can you say it's pre-dynastic or 5,000 years old? It might have been made yesterday in a Chinese workshop or something, which is but it's utter nonsense for anybody who really understands the nature of the precision. Even trying to make this today with our best 5-axis automated mills would be tremendously challenging and tremendously expensive, because you do need things like the diamond tip tools. You would burn through them as well trying to carve this thing. It would be incredibly expensive to try and do it. And for that matter, we'd love to see somebody try and do that. But anyway, the point is that if people want to try and make one by hand, or if people have access to other vases, then yeah, we want to try and get those scanned. And so hopefully we can leverage our connections to make that happen. I don't know. It's going to be like a case-by-case basis. And I've already got several other people that have other artifacts and vases that have come forward. And I'm going to try and organize that and see if we can make it happen. I'd love to say we could do it for free for everybody, but it is a process. It is, you're using time on machines that cost upward of
millions of dollars.
$250,000. Yeah, and more. But
And these aren't very portable, right? Like you would have to bring
no.
the thing to it.
Yeah, you'd have to take it to a workshop because these are generally like things that, on big robotic arms, and it's they're complicated bits of gear, typically used in industries like the aerospace industry. So yeah, that's the intent, and then there's obviously work involved in, then translating the results from that scan, doing the analysis and whatnot. So we are trying to open source this as much as possible. I've been really encouraged by the results. Particularly, there was an article on unsigned.io. A guy named Mark wrote just an amazing article. I've been talking with him quite a bit, really diving into the analysis of the vase based on the model that we released, which is a very accurate, high resolution model of the vase. So it's been really interesting, and I think it's for the important part about all this for me is it's the first time that this type of in-depth analysis has been done on an ancient artifact like this, and the results are just, I think, game-changing for what it the whole idea of how these things were manufactured. For sure, I'm confident in saying that you cannot do this with sticks and stones and pounding stones and flint chisels and rubbing on it with sand. There's literally no way. This would be, again, borderline, if not probably impossible for us to make even as recently as 50 years ago. And today it would take our most advanced machines and mills, like 5-axis sort of CNC machines, to even try and make this out of some sort of homogeneous material, like either acrylic or, steel, aluminium, aluminum.
Well, not to mention that it's like, even, I mean, the lug handles, and then even if you did make it on the lathe, like how are you going to account for the lug handles there, and then the perfect symmetry of the lug handles I mean, it's awesome.
Yeah, so that's why you need a lathe as well. Like there was one of the follow-up video that I did after the first video. I got tons of questions about, well, what about what about the area in between the lug handles? Because yeah, you can't, a lot of the vase and a lot of those objects, you can imagine being turned on a lathe, but then you have to deal with these lug handles that stick off the side of it that you can't machine with that lathe. You have to come back with a different tool, a different process to remove. You'd leave like a bull nose in that lug shape all the way around the vase, and you might come back with another tool to remove that material in between the two handles and leave the handles there. And so in the follow-up, we did some analysis on that area, and you're still talking less than 5/1000 of an inch of geometric precision relative to the center line and top of the vase in that space, which is just utterly remarkable, given that, even in our best processes today, when you talk about changing the tool or changing the process, it introduces errors into the artifact, and we just really don't see that on this vase. And then, yeah, there's all sorts of other sort of sacred geometry encoded in it that Mark has shown, but for me, it's a little tricky, and we try to walk people through the nature of precision and what these findings really mean, because when you talk about precision, people use the word a lot. It's a difficult concept to truly understand unless you're involved, I think, in that industry and in that machining industry, and understanding the depth of precision that is shown by this vase. It's kind of an easy concept to understand when you think about like a flat surface or a 90-degree bend, but we're talking about compound curved surfaces with this vase, which in and of itself, it's an ellipsoid. So what you have to do is you have to look at different parts of the vase and match them to sort of geometric shapes that you can perform geometry on, like regular shapes, spheres, cones, cylinders, torids, flat planes, things like that. And that's what we did with the scan. And we did that, or I should say Alex and Nick did that by matching in some cases, tens of thousands of points of reference. So it's a very accurate representation of a particular segment of that vase. It represents that part of the vase really, really well. So you match, say, a sphere to the bottom part of the vase area. Now you can perform geometry on that sphere to determine like where's its actual center point. And you could do that with a sphere if you had 5 points right on the top of the sphere, or you had 5 points around the edge of it. The geometry for that sphere is going to work out the same way. But there was like 70 or 80,000 points of reference used to create this particular sphere that represents the vase. So it's very accurate. And you find that center point of that sphere is almost perfectly within a few thousandths of an inch, perfectly aligned with the center line of the vase. And this is a remarkable achievement, because one thing that happens is it's not only showing you that there's this relativity between that part of the vase and the center line, but it's also the regularity of the shape itself. Because if that vase if that sphere is distorted in any way, it's going to shift that center point around. So yeah, it's that type of relativity that is shown with all of the precision analysis of it. And it time after time, the lug handles, the top, the bottom, the lip of the vase, the mouth of the vase, all of these things just are within a few thousandths of an inch off basically being perfect. And perfect's nothing's ever really perfect. It's just a matter of finding that
as
the
close to
relative
perfect
distances.
as we can get,
For
basically.
sure. Yeah. And again, we're talking distances here, like width of the human hair kind of territory. So yeah, it's really remarkable. So you have to back up from there and go, okay, so what does this mean? It means, well, for starters, it was machined and it was fabricated using some incredibly precise and very rigid tools. Like you can't achieve this sort of precision by hand. It had to have been manufactured with something that was guided very, very precisely. And you can almost take it a step further back from that and say, well, if this was done, let's assume it was done on something that we would solve the problem today with a 5-axis mill or something like that. I don't know if that's the technology, the type of thing that was used. It might have looked entirely differently. But I think the interesting part about that is it also means that it was designed. Like there's this design intent that shows up by analyzing these vases. And that means, it wasn't just done by somebody looking at the stone and saying, well, I'm going to shape this with hand and eye and carve the shape out of the stone. Which is how a lot of modern sculpting works today. This was designed ahead of time. And a lot of the geometric principles that have now been shown that exist in the vase by guys like Mark, who wrote the unsigned.io article about it, and a couple other people on Twitter that have been going crazy looking at the model. It seems very clear that this was designed with a lot of mathematical principles in mind. And in fact, Mark in that article says that it starts to resemble much more closely a mathematical map than it does like a vase. So it's almost like it's similar to the Great Pyramid in a lot of ways in my mind, in that there's the deeper you look into it, the more of these principles begin to emerge that you find encoded in the object itself.
Watch, it's like a Coke can from the pre-Diluvian people, and it's like, yeah, here you go, and we're going like, oh, no, but I mean, it is amazing. But
yeah, so I just think it's the first time this type of analysis has happened on an ancient artifact like this, and I hope it opens the way to doing more of this type of work on these objects. And I think it is a real game changer. I think it's very threatening to the standard model because of the implications of what it means, that there's absolutely
it's going to be very
chance.
hard to explain away. Like, how are you gonna iron, chisel, and explain that away to me here?
Well, I mean, and not even iron, right? You got to remember too. This is a pre-dynastic vase.
Even if you had steel, you couldn't do that. Even
that's right.
Today with steel in it,
or even diamond tips, you're not doing it by hand. It doesn't matter how you're doing. Even with hand power tools, with diamond tips, you're not going to make this sort of thing. And the interesting thing about the vases overall is that that's a class of artifact. Again, there's tens of thousands of them were found beneath the Step Pyramid of Djoser. It's a 3rd dynasty structure at Saqqara. They're found in burials that stretch long, thousands of years before the dynastic Egyptian civilization ever arose. Even 15,000 years ago, they've been found in burials that go way back. A lot of these, even in the standard model, the tens of thousands that were found beneath the Step Pyramid, even the standard model says that these were inherited heirlooms from earlier times, and they typically pretty much disappear after the 3rd and 4th dynasty. You just don't; they're not being produced in Egypt after that. So even the people that say, well, the dynastic Egyptians must have made them, then why did they stop making them? Because pretty much all the vase production after that switches to alabaster or white calcite, which is a much softer stone. And you can also see the hand-carved nature of those alabaster vases. They're beautiful. There's many, many examples that they exist as canopic jars and other artifacts all throughout the dynastic Egyptian timeline after that. It's wonderful work, but it's definitely hand-carved. You have these, I call it a tale of two industries. You have this high precision, all of these incredible hard stone artifacts that are made with amazing degrees of precision, and then you have the other artifacts that do match the whole, primitive hand tool methodology that is shown by scenes on the walls, and it's backed up by some of the tools that we found in the archaeological record. And I think it's an accurate representation of the capabilities of the dynastic Egyptians. You have these two classes. You got one that fits and one that doesn't. And the interesting thing about the vases is that high tech precision line, or that those things, they all just disappear after the very earliest times. But this same dichotomy, or this paradox of like, obviously handmade stuff versus precision, very interesting artifacts that exists not just in the vases. That those two industries also exist with the columns, with the boxes, with some of the architecture.
Yep.
So it's almost, I think you look at this stuff and
like
you
with
can
the
start,
symmetry of certain statues,
yeah,
or the
yeah. It all requires further analysis, but there's been a fair bit of work done into it. But you can see the difference though. There's obviously hand carved stuff where you can see the tool marks on it, versus the stuff that is very precise and has signs of advanced tools, being used, circular saws, tubular drills, things that don't match the primitive capabilities of the dynastic Egyptians. And I just think we should be looking to expand the whole inherited hypothesis, right? I think I do think the dynastic Egyptians probably inherited a bit more than just a few vases. I think they inherited a number of other artifacts that were brought into their culture, used, renovated, claimed in some cases, like having people would chisel their names on them. We see lots of examples of that. And the writing is a whole other story in terms of how primitive the writing looks relative to the artifacts themselves. We see that on tons of statues, boxes.
okay. So if they're inherited, I know you're not like a big speculator, but let's speculate for just a second, like
Sure.
like who they're inherited from, and what's your best guess in all this listing? What do you think happened here?
So it's an interpretation of the evidence that we have. I think the best case scenario, the thing that best fits the evidence that we see, and not just the artifacts, but also the stories from the ancient Egyptians themselves, the cultural myths and legends that come from cultures all around the world, the advances in science in the last 20 years when it comes to things like catastrophism, like the discovery of the Younger Dryas, that whole period in history, the extension of the human timeline, like all these other factors that should be affecting the story of history that typically are pretty much ignored by the standard model, the version of that civilization started 6,000 years ago. That's been an idea that hasn't shifted for like 100 years or more now. But there's lots of these things that should affect it. And taking all of that into account, I think the best hypothesis that fits all of this evidence is the idea that, we've been around for probably longer than we think we have. We've risen to heights of civilization in the past, and then we were wiped out. And I think we're looking at the remnants and artifacts that most likely came from a pretty advanced lost civilization at some point, pre-Diluvian, pre-cataclysm. Now, whether that was the Younger Dryas cataclysm of 13,000 years ago, or it was something else longer, further in time back than that, I don't know. I think that it's possible that civilization could have existed 100,000 years ago or more in the past, because we know us as a species, our dates have been going back further and further and further. We used to be 50,000 years old. Then we found some stuff in Ethiopia that put us at 190,000 years old. Then we found, a jawbone in Morocco that put us around 300,000 years old. And now the latest studies into teeth morphology and, our DNA in terms of us and Neanderthals splitting from a common ancestor, put us in the range of 800 to even 1,000,000 years old as a species, like as anatomically correct humans. So, that's going a lot further back in time than just the last glacial maximum. Like you're going
Right.
into
And if you're going
periods.
around like an anatomical human or like how we are today for, basically a million years, and then you go like, oh, wait, what? Fire? I mean, it just seems it's kind of ridiculous. But yeah, so I'm with you on that. I mean, I do often think about, okay, what if we're looking at their technology, or we like see stones, like and we just don't know what we're even looking at, like, because it's completely different than because I always think like, well, what, because I don't like Geopolymer people. I mean, I like them. I like they're probably like half of them are probably my fans or whatever, but I'm not a big
Yeah,
Geopolymer person
me either.
because they're always that explains it. It's just, well, obviously it was Geopolymer. And I'm like,
It's just mold.
even if it were Geopolymer, like how did you get the materials? How did you mix them? How did you get this bunch of stuff? Like where's their
Yeah,
trucks? Where's their cement trucks? Where's their whatever? I mean, I don't know. They're just
yeah. So yeah, I'm on the same boat with geopolymer. I think it's an interesting theory. Probably it needs more investigation. There are some interesting possibilities for it, particularly in South America, Tiwanaku, Pumapunku. I really don't. I think there's considerable evidence against it when it comes to particularly granite artifacts in Egypt and also the limestone work.
and the quarries.
I dive into it, yeah, the quarries, and I do dive into it in a couple of videos where I sort of give my thoughts on it. I think there's significant evidence against it. It just, particularly when it comes to granite, I just think that's nonsense. Anyone that thinks that granite artifacts weren't carved or cast, and at the end of the day, even with say the vase, right, which I've had a lot of people saying, well, it's injection molded, it's geopolymer,
Yeah, I was gonna say.
doesn't explain the precision. Who made the mold? What mold is going to take this cast? And even people that do injection molding, and I've talked to some of these people, you lose precision with that. You cannot create that degree of precision with injection molding or any type of polymer, like any type of molded material. You still need to come back and refine it and machine it. And if you say, well, this was just cast and it had that precision, well, you still have to make the mold. You still got to make a mold that reflects this precision in the first place. Like it doesn't it doesn't it's almost it almost doesn't matter whether you think it was molded or it wasn't. You still have to explain the precision that's inherent in it. I don't look. I don't put any weight behind any of the geopolymer theories on this stuff. We have quarries, we have tool marks, we have obvious evidence of machining. I've taken microscopic images of some of these artifacts, and you can see machining lines in that as well, even the smooth stuff. And not only that, it's like how you're making this conglomerate. Like there's quartz chunks, there's huge inclusions of actual quartz in the stone. Not only that, you've got tons of articles of artifacts with veins of other materials that run through them that are naturally occurring in this. And we have quarries as well. We literally have quarries where there's these artifacts still attached to the bedrock that were in the process of being removed. Things like the unfinished obelisk and the Aswan quarry. You've got quarries for the limestone blocks right at Giza. Go walk around the back of the middle pyramid, and you'll see a whole area where they were taking blocks of limestones out to build the pyramids. There's literally the footings for all those blocks are just out there. You can see where they were cutting them off the ground. So, and you've also got fossils in that material. You've got the same strata lines from the different sedimentary layers of limestone. There's lots that you can get into on the geopolymer theory. But the other thing you said was about technology and looking at it,
Mm-hmm.
trying to look. When I do, and I like to preface, and I talk about it in a few different videos, but we look at the past and we look at some of these advanced objects, and we do tend to look at them through the lens of our own technology. And Graham Hancock likes to say we have an electromechanical approach to problem solving. Our technology has evolved along specific lines, and it's like you and I understand what an iPhone is or a mobile or cell phone is today. You and I couldn't make one, but we understand. We have the context to understand what a camera is, a touchscreen is, a wireless networking, a cellular network. All of these little factors that we can look at this black object and understand all of the things it means and put it into a context. And in 100 years, 1,000 years, we're going to know more about lots of different areas of technology. I do think it's possible that when we look at the past, some of the answers to some of these questions, like what were things for, how did this work, how did they do it, may exist in realms that are outside of that perspective right now, outside of our understanding. I don't know that we have the context to really look at that stuff and put it into like an understandable frame of reference. To us, it just looks like stone, just looks like a site that's for some reason has basalt and limestone and granite all arranged in certain ways. And it would be a similar exercise to going back and showing a caveman like an iPhone that was dead. That's just a shiny black thing that you have no clue what it does or how it works, and it breaks if you bang on it with a rock. I don't think I'm not sure we have that context. So I constantly try to look at the past with an open mind, um, and not. That's why I don't generally speculate. I mean, we can definitely go down the route of like, well, how would we do this? How
Right.
would we build the Great Pyramid? Could we do it? Yes. Could we make any of the artifacts that we see from ancient Egypt? Probably. If somebody had the time and money and effort to do it, we've never done it, but we have the capability, I think, to do it. But it would be just a massive drain on resources to do a lot of that stuff. Take a lot of time and
Well,
effort. But
and the prevalence at which a lot of these things were done, it doesn't look like it was super hard for them.
Mhm.
I mean, like especially like when you go to Peru and you're going like, okay,
Yeah,
um, I don't know why they built like polygonal stones or why everything is like some crazy puzzle piece of
yeah,
magic weirdo each individual stone. Like it's like it had to be completely thought out before it was placed. I mean, we don't
yeah.
do stuff like that. No two stones are
No,
alike in Peru.
no. It's literally
And
the hardest way to build a wall. They chose the
exactly.
most difficult way to build a wall, which is, and that sort of debunks a few things that guys like Michael Shermer would bring up. And I did a recent stream where I kind of tore apart. He wrote an article on Substack about Graham Hancock's Ancient Apocalypse series.
Mm.
And one of the things that comes up occasionally is, well, how come we see a lot of these megalithic constructions all around the world? And they're like, well, that's just, I forget the term for it, but it's basically, it's just like, it's common problem solving. It's like people coming up with the same solution to a problem independently. And now that phenomena that does exist. And when you're talking about like, you know, chipping, like flaking stone to make a spear point, or sticking a stone spear point on a wooden shaft to make a spear. Yeah, that's coming up with a solution to a problem, and people may have done that independently, but I don't think that explains things like megalithic walls. I mean, it's literally the hardest way to build a wall, and
Yeah,
it's
it's
not
not
like
like
people are going to
bricks, like standardized
no,
brick sizes, or even
yeah,
stuff you could move with your hands. It's
yeah,
like,
yeah, like the Inca did on top of the polygonal walls. You see that everywhere, which is like
mhm.
small local stones with mud mortar, and they stuck it together. Is it a wall? Yes. Does it perform the same functions as megalithic walls? Yes. So why you can't? I don't. Yeah. It's the stuff in South America is mind bending, but you see it in lots of other places around the world too:
Yeah,
Egypt, Easter Island,
polygons.
Turkey, Lebanon, blah blah blah. But it is the most difficult way to build a wall. Like it's the most challenging, and the stuff in South America, in Cusco and Sacsayhuaman is just spectacular.
That's
It's
like, I mean, I'm actually really fascinated with the nub concept too. Not that I
mhm.
know, but here's the thing: is like for me, it's not about like a lot of people will be like, oh, nubs were for this function or this function, or
Yeah,
and that doesn't explain the fact that they're prevalence and they're found everywhere. That's the
yeah,
interesting thing about them is are what are we looking at here? How much cross cultural, is it was it a complete and total global civilization that was
mhm,
interconnected? Just like today, it doesn't matter if you're in Japan or whatever, Egypt or Texas, you're still going to be using probably steel and concrete and
yep,
nails and screws and stuff. So I mean, it seems like there's some differences in Egypt to Peru, but there is also stuff that you're going, it's like they were all using concrete, or not, they were okay, well, like how we use concrete today.
yeah,
Like they were all using 2x4s in some kind of way.
right.
They may have different designs, they may have their own little way about doing it, but there was some stuff that was going on that was like the polygonal wall stuff, where and that just makes me, how has that been discarded up until now? Like that's really confusing to me.
Yeah, yeah. The whole nub thing is interesting too. I don't look, and I don't. I think most of the. I mean, were some of these nubs in some places used for lifting bosses and stuff? I think so. Like, there's examples where yes, that seems to be definitely what they're for. But there's also tons of them where that's just not possible. Like
There's
that's
bedrock
not the only
nubs,
way. Yeah,
like
there are bedrock nubs. I saw some in the Sphinx Temple when I went in there as well. They're all over the place, and I don't have I don't have an explanation for them. And they do. It's a phenomenon that exists everywhere as well. And yeah, I don't. I don't have an explanation for them. And I do think that that whatever culture we're talking about, I do think it was global. I don't think it looked like our civilization in terms of numbers or size and scale. I do think it obviously also existed alongside, primitive hunter gatherer, essentially cavemen, Stone Age, Neolithic, Mesolithic times. Um, in the same way that we do to a much smaller extent, there are still uncontacted tribes. There are a few examples of hunter gatherer societies that live alongside our civilization. I just think that balance was a lot different
But maybe
back then.
the numbers were reversed.
Yeah, well, potentially, yeah. I mean, I don't. Yeah, it wasn't huge, but I do think when you look at to me South America, it's similar to Egypt. It's not quite the same. Like there is the Coricancha is about the closest thing to in that's the big now it's a church, of course. In Cusco, the megalithic work in there is very similar to like the Valley Temple of Egypt, but a little smaller scale, but very similar in techniques. Now the rest of the polygonal walls with the wavy curved lines that are everywhere, that's similar to Egypt, but not quite the same. There's a lot of similarity people draw between that and say that the Menkaure pyramid or the third pyramid, the granite with all the granite casing stones
Mhm.
at Giza.
Or the
So to
Siren and
Assyrian, which is very linear. You just don't see the
Valley
same
Temple.
linear nature of stuff in South America. So I think it's either a different flavor or potentially a different evolution or expression of a similar technology that may well be a different offshoot or a different time or a different part of that same civilization. But certainly to me seems like a lot of the same technology and technique is involved. Like you see a lot of the same things in terms of you see walls built from a single material. It's not like a mix of different stones. They're or not a huge mix of them. Then they went to great effort to bring stones from a long distance away to build this particular wall or in this particular place. You see, and you know, there's commonalities in terms of the precision that you see in it, the size of the blocks. There's a lot of things in common, but there are differences too. And I think that can be, and it's all speculation, but I think that can be explained as just a different offshoot, potentially a different timeline or a different expression of a similar technology of a similar civilization. And you see a lot of that in our world too, like the architectural differences between Japan and the US or the Western world. Like there's different expressions that of architecture and of styles that use similar materials and similar techniques. And it's
Well,
just, I think,
I mean, the
too.
scoop marks and like the Ajuan quarry is very similar to some stuff that you have in Peru too. Like if there's a lot of that weird scoop marking like pattern with that's bizarre.
Yeah, there's lots of commonalities. You see that. I mean, there's scoop marks on the megaliths at Stonehenge that you see them all over the place. Yeah, it's that's a whole other the technology side of it. I think a lot of the same tools must have been involved. So I do also do deep dives into a lot of the tooling that's in Egypt. There's some just truly remote. I mean, Egypt's like the best of it because I think we have the most well preserved artifacts and architecture there, the biggest collection of it. Even though it's still been sort of
repressed from and they'll be like
renovated and reused.
Look, we came up with a little temple in the pyramid. You can look at like that newest thing that came out. And you're really like, oh, you just discovered that? Yeah, right. You just discovered that. But like,
the little
okay,
passage, like the
we need some tourism.
ceiling.
Let's open a little thing.
Or the chevron ceiling, little
that little
thing they
peak.
discovered.
Yeah,
that was interesting. I think it's just an extension of that chevron structure to me. I looked at it. I was like, I'm not sure it goes anywhere. I think it's just an extension of that chevron structure, and they didn't need to fill in the space with stones beneath it potentially. I don't know. Zayu asked. I watched the press conference. He said it was actually pretty funny. One thing he went out. He actually said he wants to put a stone from the pyramids in the mouth of anyone that thinks this was some sort of done by some sort of ancient civilization. He invoked aliens and spaceships. He was off his rocker in that press conference. It was pretty funny. And he seems to think that right below that, like in between that and the descending passageways, where they'll finally find the Khufu burial. I'm like, okay, bro, let's see how that goes for you.
Wow, they're still on the tomb thing, huh?
Well, yeah, he's 100%. Yeah. I don't think he's ever letting that one go.
Yeah, well, that's just I mean,
there's
they have the tombs of the Valley of the Kings and the Queens. Like I don't understand. Like no one's ever been found in the pyramids, and they are not like they're total machines when you go inside them. They're no hieroglyphs, nothing. It's just and they're super uncomfortable to be in. Like I don't think they were like in terms of like going down to the subterranean or whatever. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Okay, so I heard you say that on the Seraphim boxes, or how do you say it? You say it differently.
I say Serapeum, but it's I get, trust me, I get people telling me I pronounce things incorrectly almost every day. So yes, I say Serapeum. Some
Okay,
people say serapeum.
I say seraphim. Like I
Yeah,
don't know, but like I'm a
that might be
Texan and
closer
I
to the
say
Greek.
y'all, so who
Yeah.
knows? I don't. It's not like I'm like the epitome of the
Either way.
pronouncer. Anyway, how okay, like the big boxes, the
Yep.
seraphim. Um, and I when I was there, I kept on always wondering like why there were like the little no or there were little like scoops taken
Scoop
like ice
marks.
cream scoop harps taken out and
Yeah.
stuff. But you were kind of saying that it's almost like there was like a yin and a yang in terms of like it's almost like there was a certain maybe I don't know weight or balance between each
Mm.
wall. If am I understanding you correctly
Yeah,
with
yeah.
that?
Well, so there's a couple things going on there. There is a lot of the scoops that you see on the outside of the box, the almost like the eggshell shaped things. What they were doing there was emptying cracks. So I
Right.
think the bottom line and one of the conclusions I've come to about the boxes there is that solidity was important. So they couldn't, which has some interesting implications when it comes to function. Like, why do you care if there are small cracks in these giant granite boxes if all you're doing is throwing in some
Good
mummies
count.
of bulls and slamming the
Yeah.
lids on it and then saying it's done? Doesn't matter. But they went to extreme effort to empty out cracks. So if you have it's like if there's a crack in the on the surface, they would empty the crack out. So they would carve and sort of empty that crack out so it can't spread any further. And then they would go to all those lengths again to then polish that surface on the outside. So you see this on a lot of these beautiful, like particularly all the finished ones. Not every box in the Serapeum's finished, but there's plenty of examples that are finished, and they've got these scoops and they're impeccably polished. And in some cases, it's not just a small scoop. There's big scoops and chunks of it. And
And
they
there's
where that
nubs.
there's nubs. Well, yeah, on the lids there's and definitely those are lifting
Lifting nubs.
bosses for the lids, which is interesting because it's like and not all of them have it, but it's like, well, again, how come why you want to move the lid on and off many times or several times? We don't know, but the other than that, they would facet the outside, so they would create flat planes, and a lot of those are interrupted by scoops and where they've removed cracks. And on the inside, if they could, it seems to me, if they could keep everything flat and square, in which this is Chris Dunn's done some analysis on this, and so have I with measurements, and so has guys like Ahmed Adley and a bunch of like Egyptian engineers that have gone in there and it's remarkable, like the squareness and flatness of those surfaces. And you got to remember that relative geometry, the same thing we talked about with the vase, also comes into play here because these are single piece objects. They're not bolted together, different blocks of granite. They're single pieces. So keeping one wall that's 11 foot away from the other wall, perfectly perpendicular or parallel to it is a remarkable feat. So that relative geometry of it plays into how difficult it would have been to do it. And there are plenty of them that are perfect on the insides, that they're flat, square, all that stuff. Some of them haven't been finished though. There's like inside corners that haven't been finished, and then you'll see deformities on the inside of the wall. And what we realized when you see that sort of thing on the insides of the boxes, and this was just an observation we made recently, it in some cases, and we're trying to go back to confirm some of this stuff too, but it looks like if there's a scoop or there's a deformity on the inside on the wall, then it looks to us as if that's almost matched by what's happening on the outside of the wall, like on the outside of the box in that same area. So what seems to have been important more so, I think it's like your default answer was this is like the baseline design was flat, square, perfect mirror finish on the inside. But if for some reason you couldn't do that through a defect in the stone or some other reason where you had to take a scoop out or you left there's a bulge on the inside or it's not finished, then it seems like there's a matching thing on the outside of the stone. So the objective again seems to be that the boxes need to be solid. And yeah, maybe there was a minimum,
And like a
depth
weight
depth of stone.
distribution, like per
Yeah,
side, or yeah.
right. Right. They needed a minimum depth of stone. So and all of these things to me, the solidity, the requirement, this even the precision on the inside, to me, it speaks to a functional purpose. Like you're going to tremendous effort to create these features in these boxes that, to be honest, if they were simply symbolic sarcophaguses or boxes for dead bulls, who cares? Like you don't need to make square corners. You just scoop it out, throw things in, put the lid
Well,
on,
I
done.
always thought it was so with the pumpkin tooth arrangement, meaning it's like you have a box here, and then there's a room in front of it that won't have,
Mhm.
or no two boxes are facing each other. It's
Yeah,
like
they're offset. Yeah.
like yeah,
Yeah.
they're offset like that. I kind of was there's a functionality to that, and I
Yeah.
don't know. Another thing that always bothers me about all these sites is that there's always an unfinished element about it that it's like what
Yeah,
so the catastrophe happened while you were in the middle of making this amazing thing, or what, like why didn't you
potentially.
finish it? I
Yeah,
mean,
I don't know. That there's lots of unfinished sites. So you see the same thing at the Assyrian. You see it at the pyramid, Menkaure pyramid in particular. You know, it's at the Serapeum. The unfinished work, and it's something that like Russ from the Snake Bros focuses on. He has a great presentation looking at the unfinished work from all around the place. It does seem like something happened, like work was interrupted at some point. And
mhm,
the Serapeum's another great example of it. We got a box in the hallway. You've got
right.
unfinished boxes in some of the alcoves. You know, tools were put down at some point and never picked up again, which is yeah, I don't know. It's to me, it does speak to potentially some form of cataclysm.
Yeah, because it's not
Maybe it was
just like
interrupted
there are
by.
some places that it's destruction. It's like you go to Elephantine Island and it looks
Oh
like a
yeah,
bomb went off there or something. That's just like,
yeah.
oh, something was destroyed. Not like,
Tennis,
but so, there's other places, yeah, Tannis, but there's other places
Kano.
where it's like, no, it just was not
Yeah,
finished.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, in some stuff, yeah. I mean, obviously the Serapeum's more protected;
Or
it's underground.
Lebanon, like,
Yeah, same thing. Well, yeah, and you're also looking at it through. It's difficult when you talk about destruction. I mean, Saxe-Huaman, particularly the areas away from the wall, you see the same thing. Karnak's like you talk about a bomb hitting it. Karnak looks like it's that too.
yeah,
A lot of it, I think, a lot of the stuff we do see that of the broken bits and pieces, you can't attribute it all to cataclysm. I think a lot of it's the hand of man.
yeah.
I think
Could be
you know
wars or,
lots of the next religion comes along and it's like tear down the idols, tear down the gods, remake the site. People, you have to look at all of these sites through that lens of thousands, literally thousands of years of not only construction and creation and renovation, but also destruction and quarrying and just zealotry that's just smashing stuff up in the name of whatever god is in flavor.
yeah. I mean,
That
we do that
particular.
today.
Yeah, we do. Well, it still happens. It's
Yeah.
human nature. It's still happening, unfortunately. um yeah, I mean, it's just how we roll.
So okay, so you do tours to all these places, or well, not all of them, but you to like what's your schedule with all these tour things?
Well, this year's pretty busy. Yeah, I've done a couple tours, well, like two or three now to Egypt, three maybe. And I've really grown to enjoy doing those. So I originally, my purpose was always to use it as a research opportunity, a way to kind of fund going there for research. And one of the nice thing about our tours, and this I still focus on this to this day, is special permission. So they're a great opportunity to, particularly with the contacts and the guys I work with in Egypt now, Yusuf, and particularly Mo, the guy that sort of runs the tours and deals with all the logistics. Fantastic dude, because he can arrange all these special permissions. So, for example, the last trip, end of last year or towards the end of last year, we got into the Sphinx Temple, which is rarely seen. Like, this is a lot of people go into the Sphinx enclosure, but then actually getting into the Sphinx Temple, I mean, there's just no video footage. No one's been in there for, I don't know, decades almost. It feels like Robert Temple got in there. He talks a lot about it in his lectures, but this is from decades ago, and he's got some still photographs of that stuff. But we got full access to the Sphinx Temple. We get do the special things like going down into this and renting out the whole Great Pyramid for a couple of hours after sort of regular hours on the plateau, and getting access to the subterranean chamber, all of those sort of things. So that's, for me, that's kind of the primary benefit of doing the trips is getting these special permissions to go to these places. And because these all cost thousands of dollars each, and it's like, I can't go there and do that myself. So it's a great way to sort of spread the cost out amongst the group, and then everybody gets to experience it. But yeah, this year, man, it's going a bit nuts. I'm about to go to Turkey. I haven't been to Turkey for the first time, so in a little under a month here, I'm off to Turkey. We're gonna have it's going to be interesting because obviously the earthquake happened
Yeah.
there. Göbekli Tepe is down there at that towards the Syrian border. Where we're staying is an area that was affected by the earthquake, although the town we're in, thankfully, not as bad as other towns. So that'll be interesting. But I'm very much looking forward to seeing those sites. And then I think July, I'm going to the UK for the first time. Hugh Newman and I are putting on a trip. Yusuf's
Figuring
coming
out
over for that.
Stonehenge and all that.
Me and Yusuf have been talking about it for years. So we finally made that happen. We're gonna get over to the UK to see a lot of those sites I haven't seen before, and then I think Egypt later in the year. Yusuf. I go over. Yusuf does his own trip as well. He puts together his own trip, and he invites me sometimes as a guest host. So I'm going to do that, and then I think my next tour for Egypt that I'm going to try and put together will probably be like January, February 24, which should be fun. I've got some interesting plans for that. We're trying to book out a whole boat and stay on the boat for like 10 days on that trip. So instead of driving to Abydos and some of the long bus rides and then changing hotels to go to Luxor and then getting on a
That's
boat for like a
when
4 night
I went with
cruise.
Muhammad Ibrahim and we did
Yeah,
well, I only did 4 days on the boat, but that was for me,
that's
I was
pretty
like, that was the
normal.
most convenient thing.
Yeah, and it's the most fun. People love the boat. And
Yeah.
the Nile cruise is a fantastic experience, but I'm trying to make it so that we can spend a longer time on the boat and hit a lot of sites from there. And there's other sites that people don't often see when you sail from, say, Abydos down to Luxor. Like there's not,
Mhm.
and once you have, if you have the boat booked out, you can pretty much determine where it stops and what the schedule is. So yeah, it's cool. I'm trying to make that work. We'll see, but that's the plan at the moment.
And are
It's going to be
you
a
have
busy
any
year.
Peru trips,
Guy,
tours?
yeah, a lot. I went. Was it last year? Year before, maybe. 2021, I think. I went to Peru with Brian again. He invited me on one of his tours. Jimmy and I went down to Peru. That was fun. They were a little nuts with the COVID
Oh
at
yeah.
that time, double masking and all sorts of nonsense, and closed down. They closed down like 90% of the sites in terms of access. You just couldn't get. I mean, you couldn't we couldn't get to the megalithic core of Machu Picchu.
Yeah,
You couldn't even
I
get
went in
into Bolivia.
2016 and I didn't have that problem. And when I saw y'all's thing, I was like, man, that looks lame.
Yeah, I've been there a few times before that as well, and I do want to go down there. I do want to put one together, and people ask me about it all the time for Peru, Bolivia. And I do want to see Easter Island as well as part of that. But
I want to do
um,
something actually. Yeah.
next couple of years, I hope so, because as soon as I get the impression that everything's kind of properly opened up and we can get to Bolivia and we can do it the way that I'd like to do it, then yeah, I would love to go back to Peru. I love Peru. Like I love going there every time. Like it's just Egypt's fantastic, but it's you particularly for the sites and everything else.
Right.
But Peru is just it's a different
Yeah, the
the
food's
experience
amazing and
the whole
yeah,
experience of being in Cusco, like it's just everything outside of the ancient stuff is also a
exactly.
lot of fun in Peru. So
Yeah, yeah, I think you should get to India.
yeah, a lot of
Yeah.
people have been at me about India too. I've been to India a few times back in the old career, uh, and hadn't had a chance to get much outside of the cities. But that's on my list. Yeah, back to Japan. I've been there in the past too. There's a lot of places I want to get to. I want to put together. I'd love to get back to like the whole Southeast Asia, Cambodia,
Yeah, so you did
Indonesia,
Indonesia,
Malaysia.
Cambodia. Did you see a lot of correlation with there, like
Well,
polygonal walls, anything?
there's some really interesting things. I think you look at places like Angkor Wat, and there's a Tikal. Not Tikal. There's a bunch of sites down there that I think have most likely been rebuilt on top of older structures. So there's some evidence for some of that. But I'm real interested in like Gunung Padang and some of these other areas that are tough to get to. Uh, that I'd love to get to at some point. Like there's tremendous amount to see down there. Plus, it'd be good chance to go and do some more diving down. I haven't been. I used to dive a lot, and
Oh, nice.
in particularly in that area. But yeah, I've got plans to go, and I'd like to dive on Yonaguni as well off Japan. Like check that out.
Yeah, I would like a
Um,
new perspective on that because you always see like the
yeah,
like shock versus
Graham.
Graham Hancock
Yeah.
when like,
Yep.
no, it's natural. No, it's not. No, no, no.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I've looked into all that as well, and I would like to see it for myself. I've talked to Graham about it quite a bit. I mean, he says the same story that he said a bunch of times, like that when Shock dived on it, he's kind of like fighting for his life a little bit. He's not a very experienced diver. It's a
Right.
rough dive. It can be a very strong current dive. Um, and I've seen the documentaries where he looks at it, and yep, that it does look like that same sort of stonework is above the water line, but then there's particular elements at Yonaguni that seem like you can't explain that way. But I'd love to see it for myself. Like I don't really have
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
dog in that fight. It's one of those things where I'm like, I'd reserve judgment until I can maybe see it for myself.
Well, there's a lot of things like that, like even Graham thinks that. What's that one? I always get Bolivia and Bosnia confused. I
Yeah,
mean,
the
I know,
Bosnian
yeah, but
pyramid. Yeah.
the Bosnian pyramid, some people are always like, oh, the Bosnian pyramid is just a hill. It's nothing. And people are like, even if it's a hill, it's a manipulated hill. Like there's
Well,
megalithic structures there, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know. But I'd like to see for myself.
that one I have an opinion on.
Oh, okay.
Are there tunnels and things there? Yes, there's tunnels. There's definitely tunnels. People have occupied it and they've dug into it. But all you have to do with the Bosnian pyramid, and I encourage anyone who thinks it's a pyramid to maybe go do this, is go to look and consider all the pictures you see of it. It's always from one angle. You only ever see it from one angle. Go on Google Earth, 3D, spin it around, and that's all you need to do. Like it's not. I think it's part of a natural hillside that happens to look at like a pyramid from one particular angle. Now I know there's all this other work into alignment and all the rest of it, but it's literally part of a mountain range when you spin around and look at it from other angles. So my personal opinion, without ever seeing it in person, is that I think it's probably natural, but it is something that has been occupied and dug into. There's some fairly primitive tunnels that are part of it. I don't think that it's the casing stone. People call them casing
I know,
stones
but
when they
I
dig it up,
have
but
two people that
that's
have
also a
gone.
natural thing.
I know two people that have gone in person, and like they talk about this. There's almost like stone spheres, kind of like the Costa Rica stone
Yeah,
spheres
yeah, yeah,
found there too, which is a little bit like, wait, what? Okay,
yeah.
that's interesting. They have some weird artifacts there that I don't know.
Definitely. Yeah, has it been used? Is it probably an ancient occupation of it, and has
Something,
it been
right?
used? Probably, but I'm not convinced that makes it a constructed pyramid.
Well,
Um,
yeah, well, yeah. If anything, it would just be a manipulated, like, whatever,
yeah,
like hill or something.
yeah,
But
potentially, yeah.
okay. So, this since I have the Mr. Precision person with me here, like, okay, can you go into your like tubular drill marks, your circular saws, what's the
Mm.
swing saws, like
Yeah.
how prevalent is this? And
Well, I mean, it's pretty damn prevalent, particularly in the Old Kingdom. That's the interesting part about this. In a similar way to the vases are, you see evidence for very sophisticated tools, very powerful tools that have been used in particular on Old Kingdom sites. Again, it's like the pyramids. It's this backwards bit of technology that it seems like the most advanced stuff happened in the oldest times. It's a contradiction that you see that is used all the time in the mainstream story of particularly Egypt. But you see the same thing here, and there's evidence for some very sophisticated and powerful tools. Tubular drills are one of them. You see these incredible tube drill holes that and also the cores. Anyone that's watched probably one of my most popular videos is a like an hour-long documentary looking at ancient Egyptian tube drills. Goes into the analysis of an artifact called Petrie's core number 7, which is the core from a hole. So it's like this
actually,
hollow tool that drills down through the granite or whatever hard material. You see them in basalt granite, and you snap off this core, right? And there's a few of these have been found. Petrie found a few of them. He analyzed one of them, and that's since also then been analyzed further by Chris Dunn in his book. If you're interested, it's Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt. Fantastic book, particularly anyone who's a engineering mindset wants to understand this stuff. And the conclusions that you come to based on the consistent groove that's on it, that forms a spiral. You can extrapolate from that things like penetration rate into the granite, and it's remarkable in terms of it. That tool seems to have been penetrating the granite at a much greater rate than anything that we can achieve today. So if you can think about it like being a spiral groove that runs down this core, if you take that circular motion, you stretch it out in a straight line, you can measure like how deep are we going for horizontal distance, and the rate that Petrie came to was like a 1 in 60. So for 60 inches of horizontal travel or circular travel, you're going an inch down into the stone. It's not quite that, and Chris Dunn kind of touched up Petrie's numbers, but it's in that region. And that turns out to be about 500 times greater than anything we can achieve with our tools today. So you think about how we do it, hole saws into hard stone like granite, like a tile saw or whatever, spins really fast. But so you've got a high RPM, and it
you
just
had to
sort of
have water.
grinds, water and cooling, and it grinds its way into the stone. You don't leave the same sort of marks. So if this tool in the ancient tool may not have been moving quickly, could have been moving slowly, might not have worked as quick as our tools. We just don't know. But what we do know is that the marks and the signature that it's left there isn't anything like this grinding technique, which can work. You can take even primitive, you can use sand and copper tubes and you can
Mhm.
grind into granite, but the results of it are entirely different to what we see in the ancient examples. Now we've got Petrie's Core number 7, we've got tubular drill holes all over the place, particularly places like Abu Sir, but also at Giza, Saqqara, all these old
Karnak,
kingdom
when I was there,
sites.
I mean,
Karnak has a massive one, like 9 inches. It's huge, and these scale up from like quite small, like half an inch
what's
diameter, to
weird
like
is they're just like
9 inches.
there. Like you were one. I wonder, like, would you not have had something in there, like
Probably,
I mean, yeah,
I think they were functional. Yeah, I think in a lot of cases they're probably hinge points for stuff.
yeah.
Um, and quite often they've been quarried. So a lot of quarrying that happened in later millennia. I think the quarriers were looking for tube drills because you could then quarry the stone along the axis of the tube drill and try and split
Right,
it
because
in
there
half.
are some
Because
broken ones.
well, there are lots that are broken in half because I think they were deliberately trying to quarry
Weak
stones
points.
along those tube drill axes because you're more likely to crack. You already got a piece of stone, missing from it. It's like you might even use the tube drill as a wedge almost to try and
Right.
crack it open. But you see these examples all over the place, and there's something sophisticated going on there. And there's another argument that, and another set of tools like straight saws and circular saws. We see it like all over the basalt pavement to the what
Easy.
is it to the east of the Great Pyramid,
Mhm.
and you see that it's an Abu Sir, Abu Rawash. There's incredible examples of the box in the King's Chamber. There's some other sawing techniques, either circular saws and straight saws. We have evidence for both. Incredible examples. It seemed to be, again, removing the stone at a very high rate based on the striations and that analysis. And I do deep dives into that stuff on my channel. And what's interesting about all of this is that the mainstream explanation for it is, well, okay, the drilling, the tube drills was these copper tubes and sand and a bow drill and a rock on top. Of course, they've drilled it. Mark Lander did an experiment. They drilled about this far in. They broke the thing off and they said, oh, it's like Fourth Dynasty. There's been no analysis done of what the actual marks look like. And lots of people have done that experiment now. It doesn't look anything like the tool marks that we see in the ancient examples. It doesn't explain it at all. And good luck making one that's 9 inches, 9 inches in width, by the way. And not for nothing, but when Lena did that experiment, they had to take a power tool with like a tile bit to start the hole, right? You have to
Right.
it's like drilling a pilot hole. Like they had to actually and make an actual groove to and
Right.
then fit
To
their copper
start it.
tube in
Yeah.
and to start it, because good luck starting that into granite with a copper tube. And then there's some people have done experiments in the same way with the saw marks, right? So you get a copper bar and you get sand and you drag it back and forth. And does that work over time? Sure, you can grind through granite with sand because sand has corundum and quartz in it, little bits and pieces that are harder than
Hard.
the granite, and it can work. And again, but the results you get don't look anything like the saw marks that we see. What's interesting about it, other than all of that stuff, and this preamble, is to say a couple of things. One, it wears away the copper at an astonishing rate when you do this. So they must have had an almost limitless supply of copper if that's how they were making the cuts, because you can extrapolate back to like the literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of cuts, huge, big, long cuts into granite when you look at all the granite that's used, but just even in the Old Kingdom. And two, one of the questions you always see, it's always used as a debunk. It's like, where are the tools then? If I think it was some advanced tools, where are the tools? It's a valid question. We have not seen any tools for this, but it applies equally well to the mainstream explanation because they have not found a single copper tube drill. They've not found a
Yeah.
single copper drag bar. It's complete. It's as much, if I'm speculating. And by the way, I'm not saying that I know how these tools and these saw marks were made. Right? I'm saying that they were not made with these primitive hand tool methodologies with copper bars and tube drills. Like, I'm not claiming I know how it was done. Mainstream Egyptology is claiming they know how it was done. They've done experiments. They don't match any. They really don't match any of the ancient examples that we see, and I don't think it explains it. But that's the burden of proof. Like, you need the burden of proof's on them. They've not found any of these tools. Their experiments don't match the results that we see. So I don't think that explains it. And it kind of gets even more ridiculous when you dive into the
it's
theoretical like papers and explanations for how fast they cut
it's that
through
mainstream
stone.
like there's that theory of how they like, oh, they built the pyramids by flooding everything, and then they had them on these big float things, and
Mhm.
then they moved it. And I'm like, okay, sure, maybe, but like that's just as far out as anything else. I
Yeah,
mean, like, where's the evidence for that? Like, where's the
exactly.
I don't there's no there's that's just a
Yeah,
theory. There's so many of these things, but if the right person gives a theory, well, hey.
yeah. Yeah, well, that's kind of my point is that the where are the tools question applies equally well to the mainstream explanation
Absolutely.
when it
Yeah.
comes to these things, and it's the burden of proof. This is like it's a point Chris Dunn makes eloquently in his book, and it's one that I repeat often, which is I don't really ever I'll speculate here and there, but I don't claim that I know how this stuff was done. What I'm primarily doing is asking questions and pointing out how it cannot have been achieved with the mainstream story. Therefore, we should look for another explanation that is beyond what we say about the dynastic Egyptians and this relatively primitive technology. I think it's the result of advanced technology. What flavor that is or how it looks, I don't know. Like we talked about the context of technology and how it could exist. The answers might exist outside of our understanding today, but
Mhm.
I'm not claiming that I know how it was done. It's the burden of proof to prove that how it was done isn't on me. It's on the people that say they know how it was done, and that's the mainstream Egyptologists and people like that. They say that this was done with pounding stones and flint chisels and copper bars. Then show us. Go and do that, and that's never happened. You think that you can make a precision vase or a box with pounding stones and primitive tools and techniques? Then show us, and that's never been done, and it hasn't happened. People have made replicas, and they've solved little small parts of the puzzle. Somebody's like they'll lap a surface flat, or someone will carve like an inside corner on just a standalone piece of granite. That's not solving the problem, and you're ignoring the most difficult aspect of the problem. Any experimentalist or anyone that thinks they know how it was done, you have to honestly evaluate the ancient example, including the most difficult aspects of the problem, which in a lot of cases is things like the relative geometry of it, the actual precision of it. You've got to include those features. Otherwise, it's just a dishonest exercise. And once you've done that, then you take the tools and techniques that you think did it, replicate it, and then compare the two results, including the most difficult aspects of the problem, which in a lot of these cases is going to be things like relative geometry and indeed tool marks. So no one has ever satisfied those conditions, not even close. And so I think that's the challenge that's out there for people that think that they know how this stuff was done and it can all be explained with primitive tools and techniques. No one's ever proved it yet. Um,
Yeah,
I
I
don't
mean,
think
and then
anyone.
I
Yeah,
I don't know about you, but I get a lot of people sending me stuff like they'll be like, "Oh, they send me that the like video of the Easter Island moai being moved
that's
back
so
and forth
stupid. Yeah,
with rope or like, whatever. They'll send me some guy in his backyard who moved a big boulder with,
sure.
like on points, and you're kind of going like, "Okay, but like look at some of the I mean, okay, look at the Aswan unfinished obelisk or some of
Right.
the actual finished
Yeah,
obelisks that
yeah,
are like 700,000 pounds or,
yeah.
yeah, it's,
Yeah, there's also like so for me, I am pretty careful about what I specifically say I think is evidence for some form of advanced technology. It's for me, it's tool marks, so that the tubular drills, the circular saws, the tools that we can't, and tool marks that we can't really explain. It's the artifacts that display precision that we have been able to analyze, which is actually quite few at this point, but
mhm,
there are some of them that we've actually been able to analyze. Things like the head of one of the Ramses statues at Luxor that Chris Dunn used, photogrammetry to show this sort of symmetry and precision in it. Things like the vase. We do need to do the analysis work and all of that stuff, but those things like that precision work, the tool mark work, and then I do include things that are in that massive category. So say above 250, 300 tons. I think you can move around loads, pretty good loads, like 150, maybe even 200 tons, with relatively primitive methodologies, the ones that are explained and attributed to the dynastic Egyptians.
mhm.
But it's not a linear scale. Like the difficulty doesn't go up linearly as weight increases. It's like a logarithmic scale because you have to deal with like material failures, just the friction coefficients. the heavier it gets, the more difficult it gets, like, and not at the same rate. So particularly once you start getting up above, say, 400 tons or 600 tons or 1,000 tons,
Yeah.
these methods aren't going to cut it. And again, this has never been demonstrated that you can. Can you move a 50 or 100 ton load using primitive methods? Sure. It's difficult, but it's possible. But I don't think that same solution can then be applied to, say, 1,000 ton load, which is, again, what happens, right? That's how the mainstream kind of say, well, this is how they solve that problem, because we've got this one image on a wall, the Duty Hotep image, that shows, 100 and 200 dudes or something like this pulling a sled with a 56-ton statue on it made from alabaster. And there's, it's a wooden sled. They're pulling it with the ropes, and then some dude's pouring some liquid in front of the skids, and they're saying, see, this was how it was done. So therefore, just smear this across everything. I'm like, that's nonsense. That is never going to work when you're talking about some of the 1,000-ton statues that we know existed. Oh, and not for nothing, one of them is in Tanis, which is more than 1,000 miles from the quarry for that stone, down in
Yeah.
Aswan.
That's
Like,
the
Tanis
foot
is up in the
one, right?
delta.
Or the
Yeah,
shoulder,
that's the giant foot.
the
Yeah,
giant foot.
Petrie found it originally, but yeah, so that's the category of stuff that I think needs more investigation and, a different approach to sort of solving the problem. And I think a lot of that stuff was well and truly outside the capabilities of what we know about the dynastic Egyptians. And yeah, I've got videos that dive into the depths of the details of all of these things
Yeah,
on the
you do.
channel. So yeah, it's an interesting discussion space, that's for sure.
Cool. Well, awesome. That's super cool. Well, the other thing, real quick, I wanted to talk about is I also find like columns in and of themselves to me are super fascinating. Even
Mm-hmm.
if we're talking about like, I mean, the electric drill really wasn't invented until like 1917. I don't know. Sometimes even with lays like flutes in columns, like the
Yeah, yeah.
just how symmetrical those are, or some of the I think maybe it was a column head that you were showing, like even the lotus columns or even
Mm-hmm.
Corinthian columns, right? Like I would love to do scans to see how um like uniform they are to
Yep.
other columns within the same structure, because I mean, because when like just when you're walking around, especially like the lotus columns, right, they look pretty symmetrical
Mm-hmm.
from your eye, but I wonder how they actually match up when you actually scan them. That'd be cool. And you've done a lot of scanning with your iPad and
Yeah.
whatever. Is that not that accurate, or what's
It's
the
pretty good. It's reasonable. I mean, it's not. I wouldn't call it precise, but it's good to
right
create. It's good enough to create basic models and get some basic sort of
and some
dimensionality out of
comparisons?
stuff. Very useful tool. It doesn't work on the shiny. Like, it really is horrible when it comes to like anything that's reflective. You have to like, you can solve that with fixed lights, but you have to like get lights on tripods then and try
Or
and do
maybe
it,
you should
because
get some like matte spray, start squirting some matte
yeah,
spray.
yeah, I'm not. Yeah, let's not just spray paint the
Yeah,
object.
no,
I'm just going
they
to
would
scan
not
this.
take kindly to that.
No, me, I
Yeah.
would never do it. But yeah, it works pretty well for creating basic models of stuff. And it's been a very useful tool. But I agree with you that I think I would love to see more of these things scanned. There's in particular my favorite sort of column end piece, one of those palm shaped or lotus shaped pillars. And you're right in that they can't all be turned on a lathe, and they're all like single piece granite things, which is just remarkable. There's one that's really well preserved at the Bastet up in the Delta, and I'd love to scan that and then compare it, because I agree with you. I think there's a very uniform shape and size to a lot of these columns, like that was stamped out in some factory, and they're all incredible artifacts. And it's one of those categories of things where you have this one category of this stuff that seems to exist that is really hard to explain with primitive methodologies, and then you have the other stuff, lots of other columns, like even Karnak and Luxor, like all stacked rounds of sandstone, and
Yeah,
amazing. But to me, it's almost like a
that's different.
imitation or replica of the granite work. And in fact, in the cores of those sites, you do find evidence for granite columns. Even at Luxor, there are still a few single piece granite columns
Well, and Karnak's such a
standing
hard
there.
place because it's such a like you can see like the Coptic people. I mean, like you can
Oh
see
yeah,
everything. It like it was like it's had a continuum of culture. It feels like
yeah.
forever, and so they've built layers upon. Like it's a big hodgepodge. More than any place I went, I was like, yeah, that was the biggest.
Yeah, it's layers upon layers and renovations and reuses upon layers of it. Yeah, and Karnak's really interesting. In fact, I'm working on a video for Karnak at the moment, and because there literally are layers, and in the granite core you have like the column bases. and all of these the beautiful hyperstyle halls that work probably done by Ramses II. I think it was all done in the New Kingdom. But in a couple of places where they've removed these big floor tiles, you go down about 4 feet, and you see other column bases like alabaster or white calcite column bases that probably house granite columns at some point. It's clear that they've rebuilt that on top of the remnants of an older structure, and or built it around it, because there's a granite core to that site where the obelisks are that are standing up, and the big granite structures where the giant tube drill is. The rest of it seems to be the temple's been constructed around that. And you see the same thing at Luxor. There's a granite element, a granite core to that site, and then the rest of it's been built up around it. And I think, yeah, you're looking at layers of stuff, a lot of inheritance going on, and in some cases imitation. And it's a form of respect, right? You're trying to
Biggest
if you're
form
a
of
column
flattery.
builder,
Yeah.
yeah, if you're making columns by stacking up sandstone rounds, even these giant, incredible structures that you can make through that, you probably have an understanding of just how remarkable these single piece granite columns are, because you could combine every single, sandstone hyperstyle hall, as grand as they are, and all of that, it's not even close to the difficulty that is involved in creating one single granite column that's made from a single piece. It's not even in the same scale.
And then I did watch a video you had on like voltage within stones.
Yeah.
That was, I mean, that's just, but that was just, it is really interesting to see how, it is weird how I feel like there was an intentionality into, because for instance, every time you go into any temple, like it always has rose granite in the entrance,
Yeah.
like, and then certain things are built with limestone, certain things with whatever else. There
Yeah.
has to be some sort of intentionality to why they use certain stones and for certain structures or certain statues versus others. Maybe not, but it feels like there is.
I do. That video is an interesting experiment, and it's we were basically running high voltage through basalt, limestone, granite, and later on we did try other things like calcite stuff too. But my conclusion from it was that, look, we see a different electromagnetic response from these different types of stones. Some of them act like insulators, some of them conduct much better, and it's just I look at it as like potentially a different way of trying to think about what we see on some of these sites, particularly these Old Kingdom sites. Now, whether it's statues, I'm not sure, but when you look at structures and the layout of sites, Abu Sir, Giza, the Valley Temple, you have limestone that's cased in granite, and at Abu Sir, you've got limestone cased in basalt. And in some places, and even at Karnak as well, there's some very strange effects on some of this granite and basalt, like it's flaking and melting apart. And this is on worked surfaces. This can happen to those types of stones naturally, but only after like millions of years of exposure to the sun. But yet we see it in some places on worked stone that clearly hasn't been there for like millions of years. This was, even in the wildest of speculation, let's say 100,000 years, since it's been carved, it still shouldn't have that effect that we see on the stone. So is this evidence for heat cycles? Is there something else going on? I just think that video and that work is just it's like a little pointer. It's like, maybe we should be looking at some of this stuff in a different, with open minds. And was there some functional purpose to it? Does this have anything to do with it?
I think about that all the time with, you have quartz in your phone. It's like it's a form of, we use stone and we don't even realize that
literally radio is a it's a crystal. It's like radio is crystal technology.
And it amplifies the signal, that's what its function is. And so I don't know, maybe they figured out I don't know. I heard this one guy on his Spaces. I don't know what his name was, but he was like talking about, maybe they could like see the electromagnetic free spectrum and then they could like use it. And I remember at the time, I think he was stoned, but at the same time I was like, actually, that's a pretty good idea. Maybe they could.
Well, it might be. Yeah. I would encourage, like, it's exactly that type of thinking. I think what we need to do is be open-minded in our analysis of these sites. Like, that's where I think we probably have tremendous capability and investigative capability, and we have tremendous technology today. I just don't think we're applying it as we should be to these sites to try and find some of these answers. You've got to kind of be open to some of these, I guess, fringe ideas, to then investigate along those lines to say, well, what are the potential options for a functional purpose for some of this stuff? Is it possible in any realm of possibility? I think it's still a worthy experiment to go through and try and do, in whatever field or whatever idea it is. I hate the idea that we just go, no, everything's everything's symbolic, everything's ceremonial, everything's
Right.
a tomb, case closed. You don't need to look any further. I think that's the wrong approach. And I think there's a lot of indication that there's something else going on there. A lot of these sites and these artifacts will probably functional, and we should probably be a bit more open-minded about how we look into it, apply ourselves.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right, Ben. Well, this has been super fun. Can you tell everybody where to find you, all your good
Sure.
stuff?
Thank you. Yeah, it was a great fun talking with you too, Nikkiana. But if you want to find me, it's UnchartedX.com. All my videos and everything is up there. If you just want the YouTube link, it's youtube.com/c/UnchartedX. I'm also on Rumble. I'm on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. If you look for that, I stream on Twitch as well at UnchartedX a few days a week. So yeah, you can find all those details on the website to start with. But yeah, that's if people want more of this stuff, that's where they can find it.
Okay, sounds so good. All right, we'll talk again. All right, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, and bye.
Cheers.